Okay, I mentioned herding early on. This is what people default to when they're in a state of uncertainty, as people are constantly in the financial markets. These are the groups of people we've identified who herd all the time, virtually all the time, in the aggregate. There are individuals who might be able to avoid it, but in the aggregate, all these groups herd, from the relatively naive individual investor all the way up to hedge fund managers. Economists certainly herd. That's been documented that their forecasts for earnings are grouped together extremely tightly. A lot of people say, oh, we need the government to come in and regulate these big moves, and try to dampen them and so forth. Keynesian economics is based on that idea. But the government herds just like everyone else. In fact, they're just a big group, so of course they're herding. If you look at this chart, the arrows pointing down from the top are times when the government decided to loosen up the financial world. And the arrows pointing up from the bottom are when they passed legislation to restrict the financial world. They should have done exactly the opposite. Restricted it as we got near highs, and expanded it near lows, but they're just hurting like everyone else. So when they're in a negative mood, they say, we have to tighten everything up. And when they're feeling just really expansive, then they say, oh, sure, why don't we let the commercial banks do investment banking as well, and that sort of thing. The Fed as well, the Fed are supposed to be these cold-hearted people with their hands on the lever and their fingers on the dial, and they're going to make everything better because they're smarter than the rest of us. Well, here we have a chart. At the top is the Dow Industrial Average, and at the bottom we have the instances of laughter in each Fed meeting that's held. As soon as the market got in its fifth wave in 1990, well, they started chuckling it up quite a bit. And as you can see, the laughs went up and up and up throughout this period. They peaked just shortly after the real estate market topped. It was in June of 2007. Bernanke was getting 82 laughs a meeting. That's more than Henny Youngman got in an hour. And when did it occur? June 2007. And many people here surely know that the Dow Jones Composite Index peaked that year in July. They didn't hold a meeting in July because they hold them every couple of months. And so they literally pinpointed the top. They were as giddy as schoolgirls at the top. Now, if they knew what they were doing, it should have been the opposite. They should have been saying, oh my gosh, we're about to crash. People are too optimistic. We better do something about it. They had not a clue. And we already know that because people have documented many of the statements from the leaders of the Fed at that time, and they had no clue that anything was going to happen. Now, this data comes out 5 to 6 years late. We're not going to get more data until January. And I'm going to make a socionomic prediction, which is that this laughter line is going to go up and down with the market, and their mood will continue to reflect the market no matter what. There is one group, believe it or not, that does not consistently herd. And you must know about this group because a lot of people follow these statistics put out by the CFTC. They divide people into large specs, small specs, and the commercials. And the commercials herd the least. Why is that? Are they just smarter in their investing? No. Now we know why. They're not approaching the market as a speculative market, an investment. They're approaching it as if they're walking into the grocery store or the shoe store. They're looking for bargains. Their mindset is completely different, so they're using this part. So your orientation can actually change the way you approach a market. Now, our views of herding differ from a lot of other theories. We isolated 6 theories of herding. We scored them in 8 different dimensions. A colleague of mine actually put this study together. It's also available on SSRN. I'm only going to point out the yellow square, which is number 8. On the question of utility maximization, all the other theories we saw believe that herding is utility maximizing. And we say it's absolutely not utility maximizing. It's completely unconscious, and people are just doing it because they have no basis to make a decision, so they're doing what everyone else is doing. The herding impulse is a blunt tool of survival. Way back when, if people were heading a certain direction, you might say, oh, that's where the fruit trees must be, so you followed them. Or if they were running like hell, you might say, well, they're about to be attacked by a lion, I better join them. But it's maladapted to finance. Those impulses hurt you in finance. Bubbles are not rational. Most papers say bubbles are rational. We say, no, they're not. Crowds are not wise. This idea of the wisdom of crowds is actually a great study, but it's a misnomer because what was taken there was individuals, isolated individuals, and then their responses were aggregated. And they find out you get a pretty accurate result. But when you put people into a group and they start seeing what other people are saying, then the accuracy goes out the window. Crowds are not wise. So some of the additional corollaries to the socionomic theory of finance are, number one, investors are herding all the time, not just during bubbles and crashes, even when they're quiet. Number two, rationalization is constant. That's what's going on in financial TV and in most of the articles all the time because people are looking for exogenous causes, talking about them, which are completely irrelevant, as we've seen. Number three, agents are homogeneous. So this goes against most of the studies of this type. We don't believe there's investors versus traders, technicians versus fundamentalists, smart money versus dumb money. The differences in herding and rationalizing are quantitative among individuals, not qualitative between groups. Number four, bubbles and crashes are consistent with non-rational risk aversion, not rational assessments of risk. Number five, and this is very important, there is no memory of social mood. It fleets through our brains in some area. We think it's near where the herding impulse is regulated, but there is no memory for it. That's why people in 2014 can be just as optimistic as they were in 2007 and not realize it. They're just rationalizing themselves out of it.